Story 1. I couldn't care less about a drug deal, but unfortunately the empty lot next to my old house made it the spot to do deals, and more than one shootout occurred there. I did call the police for that. A bullet went through my basement window. Story 2. It has happened. I stood at the front door and said, "Okay, bud, move along. I don't care what you're doing, just don't do it in front of my house." And they moved along. I was only kind of surprised it went so well. It was a rougher neighborhood then, and they were probably glad I didn't send my dog after them or come out with a baseball bat. They even said sorry. Canadian addicts. Huh? Story 3. Assume they are going to get caught really quickly and not worry too much about it. If I can tell for sure from my windows that what is going on across the street is a drug deal, they are not very good drug dealers. Story 4. Not me, but my neighbor 2 doors down saw a drug deal happening, called the police, and they came and eventually arrested those involved. Not long after several of the individuals were released on bail, they went to her house and set it on fire, burned the house down. Now she lives with her daughter in another state. The guys who did it got 18 months each in the county jail. Story 5. Used to see it every day in my old neighborhood. Didn't care, didn't say anything. Then one day I came home to a police barricade and a body bag in the street, just in front of my apartment. A 16-year-old was shot during a deal gone bad, so that was unfortunate. But still, not my business. Story 6. I lived in a rough part of town for about 12 years. I saw multiple times, in no particular order, drug deals, armed robberies, property thefts, prostitution, celebratory gunfire of the other sort, and domestic violence. And then I would go to work 6 blocks away in the emergency room of the busiest level 1 trauma center in the state to treat both the winners and the losers. It made for some exciting times. Story 7. I live in a nice part of the city and have literally seen people smoking crack. So I really can't be bothered with this. The police are not going to rush to get somewhere for some drug deal. Story 8. One place I worked had a soda machine next door at a liquor store. When my girlfriend was visiting one day, she walked over to get a Coke. There was a drug deal going on in front of the machine. They gave her a "what the heck" look, and she just said, "I'm just getting a Coke. But you do know everyone can see you?" She just shook her head, bought her Coke, and came back. Problem solved. No more drug deals in front of the soda machine. Story 9. I am not the most street-smart person, so I would probably wonder why these people spent so much time shaking hands over and over, and now they are walking away from each other. Story 10. When you work in the neighborhood, you learn to mind your business and you didn't see anything. Treat them a little nicer, and a lot of times they'll protect you. Story 11. My neighbors in Northern California had a meth lab in their house. You could smell it. People would go there at all hours, get a baggie, and sit against my door and smoke it. One day, a line of cars was in the alley between us. The guy came out and was going window to window, handing them baggies in exchange for cash. I called the police and described what was happening. They said, "Oh, so they're just hanging out." Story 12. How about more like behind my home? Or, in reality, somewhere between the police station, which is behind my home, and the airport. I ignore them. What else should I do? Get mixed up in someone else's problems? Story 13. I would mind my own business and go back to whatever it is I was doing. I've seen police brutality happen outside of my house before. The guy was yelling help, and it was 2 police officers beating him up. What do you do then? Who's going to help? Story 14. Happens across the street from us almost nightly. We just ignore it. Years ago, the house was raided by the police. They took tons of plants out, and they've been in and out of it a few times since. Assuming the guy is on their radar, and it's either prescription medications he's selling for cash or something else. Not my problem. Story 15. My neighbor started calling me a drug dealer and called the cops when my friend pulled into my driveway, and I returned his wallet to him. Mind your own business, people. Story 16. I moved to my current home 7 years ago. Back then, my neighbors didn't see anything for years. You think it can't happen here, but it can, first gradually, then very suddenly. Next thing you know, you're picking up needles and human waste, not sleeping because the car stereos are going all night, people overdose in front of you, you get caught up in gunfire, everything not locked up or bolted down gets stolen, and more. 4 years later, things are finally recovering, and I am absolutely moving along the next would-be user or dealer at my door. I know where this goes, and preventing that is a risk I'm willing to take. Story 17. This happened to me when I lived in a cheap apartment. I kept my head down and drove past without acknowledging it. There's no need for me to play cop. It honestly didn't bother me as long as my home was left alone, and it was. Story 18. Call the police, and I have done so in this situation. Honestly, I don't mind drug dealing and have ignored it at previous addresses. But this street is full of young families. Kids don't need to see that. Story 19. I was visiting a friend years ago in Houston and he looked out his window, said, "I'll be right back," picked up an assault rifle from his hall closet, and went outside to chase drug dealers off his yard. It was then I realized my friend did not live in a posh neighborhood. Story 20. Years ago, I actually did. I walked by as one of my neighbors got in a car for a minute or two, then got back out. I just gave him a wink and a smile. Later, we laughed about it and he offered me some, but I declined. Story 21. Used to live in New Orleans, saw drug deals go down on my front steps daily. I didn't say or do anything. They knew I was cool with it and wasn't going to say anything. In exchange, they made sure nobody in the neighborhood messed with the goofy-looking white boy. Win-win in my books. Story 22. I don't know anything about anything the first 3 times. After that, I'm going to ask the man what he's selling, and if it's something serious, ask him to do it down the block. Story 23. My first apartment, someone dropped me off from work. They turned to me and said, "I've picked up some marijuana here once." And I was like, "Gee, thanks in my head. I will never forget it." But honestly, I would mind my business. I didn't see or hear anything. Story 24. As someone who grew up in an area with frequent police raids, drug-related drive-by shootings, and needles left in our front garden, nothing. We mind our own business. Story 25. Nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but if they seem to be selling to young kids or if I start to see junkies sniffing around my property, I'm going to have a talk with these dealers. Story 26. What kind of drugs are we talking about here? I don't need addicts congregating in my yard, but I wouldn't mind having a close supply of good MDMA and hallucinogens. Story 27. A person sold drugs from their first-floor bedroom window in an apartment I lived in. An old grandmother driving an old Cadillac drove up and dropped the goods off. I saw this one biker-looking guy hanging around more and more. One night, I fell asleep on the couch and heard this loud bang that scared the daylights out of me. I looked out the window and there were tons of police cars outside. What I heard was them knocking down the metal door to arrest my neighbors. The biker-looking guy got handcuffed and put in the back of a police car. The people that lived there were taken away. The biker-looking guy was let out of the back of the car, and the handcuffs were removed, and he walked to a car and drove off. What did I do? Nothing, since they were not bothering me. There was a lot worse stuff going on in that complex than the dealer. Story 28. Used to happen in front of the Domino's I worked in years ago, always the same little guy. A few of us used to mark them on a little tally chart, which was next to the printed out complaints that we would all spell check and correct, and guess how much money he made that week. Story 29. Depends. If it's a one-time thing that's not affecting me, then I ignore it. If it does affect me, I'll take reasonable action. For example, if they're standing in my garden, I'll politely ask them to keep it on the sidewalk because I don't want my plants ruined. Or I'll ask them not to lean against my car because they'll scratch it. It's not about the drugs, and I do the same thing no matter why those people are there. If it is a regular thing and it's not subtle, then I call the police. But only because I live across the street from a school, and the kids don't need to be seeing that. If I didn't live by the school, then I wouldn't do anything as long as they're not harming anything. Basically, what I'm saying is I don't give a fig as long as they're not hurting me or anyone else other than themselves. Story 30. This used to happen at our old house, but once the friendly marijuana growers across the street moved, it stopped. I don't remember if we did anything about it. I'm pretty sure it was just homegrown marijuana, before legalization. So we weren't too concerned. Story 31. Call the police. I noticed it happen in front of my house and definitely did not want that to become a normal spot for that activity. Told the dispatcher that it was new for the area. Police arrived within 2 minutes. Jumped out of the patrol car so fast at these guys. Story 32. If the dealer is smart and quiet, then I don't give a damn. The state-supported rental house across from me has had a few different dealers working out of it. But some 25 to 30-year-old guys in my town get Tony Montana syndrome when they start making good money. They start attracting huge attention and being knuckleheads. After the shootout in front of my house, I installed obvious cameras. Story 33. I once lived across the alley from a drug house. The landlord rented to dealers because they always paid the rent, but it was drive-through drugs 7 days a week. I didn't mind so much when the dealers were quiet, but there was one group that started whooping and hollering from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. By the time they stopped, I'd be too angry to get back to sleep. I kept reporting them until they were forced to move out. The next group was quieter. So, basically, I mind my own business until it starts negatively impacting my life. Story 34. As somebody who shared an apartment wall with a guy who was not so subtly cooking and selling crack, I didn't see a thing. Strung-out prostitutes passed out in the hallway outside his door? Didn't see a thing. Even when I had two big, tough men knocking on my door at 1 a.m. looking for Jack, I didn't see a thing. Jack was good with drugs and bad with money. Always friendly, always had coupons for random things that he would hand out to everybody on the floor. Had a gambling problem. Would occasionally disappear for days at a time, only for somebody to spot him at the Dunkin' Donuts across town. Did I see Jack there? No, I didn't see a thing. Story 35. My neighborhood in Canada has 4 weed shops within a 5-minute walk from my front door. So weed dealers are a quaint old-time artifact of bygone days. If somebody was selling methamphetamine or heroin, I would let them go about their business as long as they were not causing a ruckus or stabbing anyone. My big regret is that the magic mushroom shop that opened a storefront last summer in our shopping area got busted and shut down after about 3 or 4 days in business. Mushrooms are fantastic, but sadly not yet legal here. Story 36. When I was working nights, I would visit my grandparents' house after my shift. Grandpa was a night owl, and I started noticing the road on the side of his house was becoming a spot for drug use and dealing. You accept what you tolerate, and I didn't want that near them. So, 2 a.m. rolls around, and the next thing they notice is a 190-pound, 6'2" man kitted out in a plate carrier dressed in all black, slowly walking towards them with my Galilease pointing at the car. The car peeled out 5 seconds after they noticed me. I've never seen anyone back there since. I remote into the closed-circuit television system I set up for my grandparents from time to time and haven't seen anything unusual since. I used to hang around the wrong people growing up, and I've seen what can happen to bystanders who happen to be around that type of situation when things go sideways. Shootouts, stray bullets, etc. Plus, people don't normally consider that when you allow that type of thing around your home and stop paying attention, you're setting yourself up to be an easy target for robberies. Story 37. Find a new place to live. If I'm living somewhere where drug deals are happening out in the open, especially right in front of my house, I don't want to be there when things go bad. Story 38. Go out and politely ask them to move somewhere else. I would only politely ask once. I grew up on the streets and have seen and done things that would make most men cry in the corner, sucking their thumb. I left that life behind me, and it is not going to happen here. If they did not move on, they would see life differently from then on. Story 39. Firstly, I would be confused about why it is happening all the way out here and is still in front of my home. I would presume it would be a significant amount of something worth caring about, because there is no reason to drive out here otherwise. So yes, I would be calling the police. Story 40. Growing up, I realized the people across the street sold drugs, as people came and went all day and only stayed for maybe 5 minutes at most. One time, a guy pulled in front of my house while I was playing and asked where so-and-so lived. I didn't recognize the name and literally replied, "If you're looking for drugs, right across the street." The guy made a U-turn at the end of my road, went across the street, and then said thanks as he drove away. Never minded it, to be honest. Story 41. This is like asking what you would do if you saw a squirrel in front of your home. Nothing. Nobody cares. Most people have seen a drug deal happening in front of their residence at some point in their lives. If you live in a city, you've seen it literally hundreds of times. If you went to college and lived on campus or in student housing, you've seen it literally hundreds of times. You don't do anything because why would you care? What a silly question. Story 42. Keep my mouth shut or invite them inside. Maybe tell them something like they need to get an ice cream man truck. I come out there with my money. Story 43. There was once a drug deal going on at the entrance to my alley. I was having major stomach problems, so I did the only reasonable thing. Rolled down the window and screamed, "Get out of the way! I have to go to the bathroom." They laughed and got out of the way. Story 44. I would be very confused about how they chose my dead-end road with 10 houses on it. Half my neighbors are retired and won't hesitate to get photos or videos of any unfamiliar vehicle or people in the area and post it on the neighborhood Facebook page. It is also minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit here, which usually keeps the riffraff home.